It started with a faint signal, a blip on the radar that seemed insignificant at first. Just another anomaly in the vast void of space. But as the signal continued, slowly growing stronger and more deliberate, the scientists at the Juno Space Research Facility were drawn into a mystery beyond anything they had ever imagined. What seemed like a routine detection quickly became a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the facility's lead astrophysicist, sat in the high-tech control room, her fingers trembling as they hovered above the console. The facility was a marvel of modern science. Walls lined with screens displaying galaxies, data streams, and simulations. But tonight, something had changed. It wasn't just the faint signal that piqued her curiosity. It was the way it moved, the way it seemed to pulse, as if it were trying to communicate. Dr. Carter had been in the field long enough to know that nothing in the universe behaved this way. But what was it? The anomaly had been detected 3 days ago, a signal unlike any previously recorded. Initially dismissed as interference or a glitch in the system, the anomaly's persistence raised alarm bells among the team. At first, the pattern seemed chaotic, random even, but it quickly escalated into something more disturbing. It wasn't just a signal. It was deliberate. Its frequency and intensity began to fluctuate in a way that suggested something or someone was sending it intentionally. The stakes were clear now. Humanity's understanding of the universe, the very fabric of reality, might hinge on uncovering the nature of this anomaly. What did it want? Was it a signal from an intelligent civilization, a warning, or something far more dangerous? The team's primary objective was clear: to answer these questions, to unlock the mystery, and to ensure the safety of humanity. Among the team, there were those who wanted answers at any cost. Dr. Carter's closest colleague, the brilliant and daring doctor. Marcus Reeve believed this could be the breakthrough of a lifetime. But there were others, like Director Stanton, who saw the anomaly as a potential threat, his eyes constantly darting to the military presence stationed nearby, a silent reminder of the growing fear surrounding the event. Conversations in hushed tones and fearful glances punctuated the control room, each person weighed down by the knowledge that whatever was happening could change everything. The unknown loomed large. What had they found in the depths of space? The days following the anomaly's discovery were filled with intense study and sleepless nights. Dr. Carter and her team pored over every bit of data they could extract, analyzing the signals with a precision that could only come from a dedicated group of scientists working in unison. But no matter how many times they ran the numbers or recalibrated the equipment, they could find no earthly explanation. The signal's composition defied everything they knew about space. The first few hours of analysis were spent trying to make sense of the basic parameters. The signal was coming from deep space, somewhere far beyond the known reaches of any star system. And it wasn't just a sound. It was an intricate pattern of electromagnetic pulses, shifting in ways that seemed far from natural. The frequencies resembled nothing recorded in the entire history of radio astronomy. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a black hole. It wasn't anything they could understand. Dr. Reeve, ever the optimist, suggested they might be looking at something unprecedented. The possibility that this was a message from an extraterrestrial civilization. He theorized that the anomaly could be a beacon, a distress signal, or an invitation to communication. The more they analyzed it, the more it became clear that the signal wasn't just random noise. It had structure. It had intent. Look at this. Dr. Carter said one evening, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Her hands danced over the holographic console as she highlighted a series of pulses. These patterns, there's repetition here. It's too precise to be an accident. This is deliberate. As they refined their models, they noticed a shift in the behavior of the signal. It began to increase in frequency, its pulses growing more rapid, more insistent. The intensity surged in rhythmic intervals, suggesting an intelligence behind the patterns. It wasn't just an isolated signal. It was communication. The realization hit them all at once. This was no accident. Something or someone was reaching out from the vast emptiness of space. A sudden tremor of fear rippled through Dr. Carter. If this was a message, who was it intended for? What did it mean? The team's excitement began to mingle with a growing sense of dread. They weren't just encountering an anomaly. They were potentially being watched, observed by something beyond human comprehension. What if it's not just a signal? Dr. Carter pondered aloud. What if it's something alive? As if on cue, the signal's intensity increased further, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the control room. The hairs on the back of Dr. Carter's neck stood up. Her pulse quickened. Could it be that they were dealing with something truly alien? Something beyond even their wildest imaginations? The fear was growing. The signal was no longer just an intriguing mystery. It was an enigma, an intelligent presence that was waiting for them to understand its message, or perhaps to decipher its warning. By the time the anomaly had been monitored for several days, its behavior began to take on an unsettling complexity. The signals had grown more sophisticated, but now there were physical manifestations to consider. At first it was subtle, a slight disturbance in the gravitational field around the object, a ripple, an imperceptible shift. But the more they studied it, the clearer it became that the anomaly was not merely a passive source of information. It was active, dynamic, and aware. In one pivotal moment, as Dr. Carter watched the data streams, she observed a drastic change in the anomaly's signature. It wasn't just a pulse anymore. There were fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, echoing outward from the core of the signal. The object was distorting space itself. It's moving, Dr. Reeve whispered, staring at the holographic representation of the anomaly. In ways that shouldn't be possible. The readings defied every rule of astrophysics. Gravitational anomalies typically signaled the presence of massive objects, but this was something entirely different. The anomaly seemed to be manipulating gravity around it, warping space in a way that even the most advanced simulations couldn't fully account for. Meanwhile, subtle heat signatures began to appear, low-level emissions that didn't belong to any known type of radiation. At first, they appeared to be thermal distortions, harmless but puzzling. But then, as the heat signatures grew stronger and more focused, the team began to realize that the anomaly was actively generating heat, seemingly at will. "We've been too focused on the signals," Dr. Carter said, her voice tight. "This isn't just a beacon. It's something alive." As the intensity of the anomaly's behaviors escalated, the debate within the team grew more heated. Some, like Dr. Reeve, believed this was an unprecedented opportunity for scientific discovery. A being, a civilization capable of bending the laws of physics to communicate across the stars. Others, including Director Stanton, were less optimistic. The government's military presence, previously a quiet observer, now took a more active role in the discussions. Stanton was growing increasingly anxious. What if the anomaly was a weapon? What if it was dangerous? They want answers, Carter. Stanton's voice was tight with pressure. Now, before this gets out of hand. But for Dr. Carter, the pressure was more personal. Every new discovery felt like a piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure she could solve, and the sense of being watched, observed by this anomaly, was almost suffocating. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was waiting for them to make the next move. Her frustration mounted as the hours stretched on. They were no closer to understanding the anomaly's true nature. Was it a being trying to make contact? Or was it a force far beyond their understanding, something they had no right to touch? Each new discovery pushed her closer to a terrifying realization. Whatever this was, it wasn't something they could control. They weren't just studying it. They were part of its plan now. It was well past midnight when Dr. Evelyn Carter, unable to sleep, made her way back to the control room. The hum of the facility was quiet now, the usual chatter of the team having subsided as most of them had retired for the night. But the silence was deceptive. The anomaly, that strange object in deep space, had not stopped its pulse. If anything, it seemed more insistent tonight. The signals had been growing steadily more complex, but as Evelyn sat at the console, she felt something shift, something unsettling. She glanced at the data coming in, her breath catching in her throat. The once predictable pattern had suddenly changed. It wasn't just a fluctuation in frequency anymore. The pulses had turned erratic, jagged, yet there was something deliberate about them, something that felt almost alive. The rhythmic hum of the signals was replaced with sharp, irregular bursts, like the anomaly was trying to tell them something. She leaned in closer, her fingers running across the console's touchpad, rapidly adjusting the settings. It wasn't a glitch. This was intentional. "Marcus," she whispered, too stunned to keep it to herself. "You need to see this." Dr. Reeve had been napping in the adjoining room, but he was at her side within moments, groggily rubbing his eyes. His expression shifted from confusion to concern as he observed the new data. The signals, previously mathematical and precise, were now more erratic, weaving in unpredictable patterns. Then it hit him. The pattern was changing, not just in structure, but in emotion. There was something deeply unsettling about the new energy the signals carried. A deep, aching rhythm that felt almost like a plea. "What is this?" Marcus muttered under his breath, his voice tight. "This isn't just a message. This is something else. This is emotional." Evelyn's stomach churned. She felt it too. It wasn't like the previous signals, mechanical and systematic. No, this was raw. The signals pulsed with a vibration that suggested anxiety, fear, longing, an emotion that was foreign and yet familiar. "We're not just decoding a message anymore, Marcus. I think it's trying to connect with us, emotionally," she said, her voice trembling. As the signals flickered and shifted, they began to evolve, repeating in what felt like urgent bursts, like someone or something reaching out. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced in her career. The anomaly was no longer simply an object in space. It was a presence, a being, aware. The idea sent a chill down her spine. The pulse, once cold and neutral, now seemed to carry a weight, like a sentient entity trying to communicate in a way that defied their understanding. The control room was bathed in the soft glow of the monitors as Dr. Carter turned to the others, who had slowly gathered in response to her frantic call. She could see it in their eyes. uncertainty, fear, and awe. "What's happening?" Jacob, one of the senior engineers, asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to get this data to the others," Evelyn said, her hands trembling as she typed commands into the console. Now. The anomaly's behavior was growing more complex by the minute, its signals turning into something that felt like it was alive, aware. The team scrambled to interpret the data, each member of the team trying to understand what was unfolding before them. The situation was escalating, and Dr. Carter felt it. The anomaly was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was something else entirely. The pulses seemed to shift in frequency as if the entity was adjusting its emotional tone. Then, without warning, the signal stopped. Evelyn's heart raced as she stared at the screen. Had they done something wrong? Or was this something far more troubling? Something they had yet to fully comprehend? The cold weight of the silence in the room hung heavy. There was no mistaking it now. The anomaly was watching them, waiting. The team collectively held their breath. The moment Evelyn returned to her quarters, she was met with a sharp knock on the door. It was Director Stanton, his face a mask of controlled concern, his eyes darting with something close to urgency. "What's going on?" he demanded, before Evelyn had even opened her mouth. "There's been a shift in the signal," Evelyn said, a little breathless. "It's evolving. We're seeing patterns that suggest emotional intent. Something we can't explain." Director Stanton's face hardened. "How much of this do we understand, Carter?" "We need clarity. We need results. Immediately." Evelyn felt the weight of his authority pressing down on her. Stanton wasn't just the director of the research facility. He represented the government's stake in the situation. And that meant national security. "We're still piecing it together," she answered. "But it's no longer just a signal. It's something else entirely. It's alive, or it's behaving as though it is." Stanton's gaze sharpened, and his voice grew colder. "What you're describing sounds like a threat, and you're telling me we're not ready." Evelyn stammered, unsure of how to put the overwhelming complexity of their discoveries into words. "No one's ready for this. We don't know what it wants." Stanton stood still for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. The military advisors had been steadily increasing their presence, and now they were more vocal than ever. There was growing tension in the air. The possibility of national security implications was no longer a concern. It was the only concern. "I don't care about what we don't understand. What I care about is making sure this doesn't become something we regret," Stanton said, his voice low. "We're moving forward. Get me a plan for immediate communication. Now." The pressure hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The entire team, including Evelyn, felt it. Stanton's push for answers, the military's looming presence, the urgency that seemed to surge from every direction. After a tense meeting with the rest of the team, a decision was made. They would attempt communication, an artificial response, mimicking the anomaly's own gravitational waves. It was the only option that seemed plausible. "Are we sure this is the right move?" Jacob asked, his voice tinged with unease. "We're not sure of anything anymore," Evelyn replied, her eyes locking with his. "But we have to try." Despite the uncertainty, the team moved quickly, preparing to send a signal of their own. Some believed it was the only way to bridge the gap between them and the anomaly. Others feared that this was the point of no return. The experiment was set into motion. The team was divided, some with hope, others with dread, but the response would go ahead under Stanton's directive. The control room was quiet. It was an eerie silence that only amplified the gravity of what was about to happen. The room was bathed in the soft glow of monitors. The team gathered in a tight cluster around the central console. "We're ready." Jacob's voice cracked slightly as he looked over at Evelyn. Evelyn nodded, her stomach twisting. This was it. The signal was set. An artificial mimicry of the anomaly's gravitational wave pattern. If it worked, they might finally get the answer they had all been waiting for. If it failed, they might provoke something far more dangerous than they could handle. The response signal was sent, carrying the distinct imprint of the anomaly's own unique gravitational signature. The room was tense, every scientist holding their breath as they waited for reaction. The seconds ticked by in agonizing silence. Then, without warning, the anomaly shifted. At first it was subtle, just a flicker in the data, a ripple of movement on the screen, but then it intensified. The anomaly's pulse surged with sudden power. Evelyn's breath caught as the anomaly's surface rippled, almost like a pupil dilating in response to the signal. It was alive, alive in a way they couldn't possibly comprehend. The team gasped as the full scale of the response began to unfold. The anomaly seemed to focus, its attention now entirely on them. The pulses became sharper, more intense, more aware. It was no longer just a distant phenomenon. It had turned toward them. It's reacting," Marcos whispered in disbelief. "It's responding." But with the intensity of its reaction came a deep, unsettling sense of foreboding. Whatever the anomaly was, whatever it had become, it was no longer just a mystery to solve. It had turned its gaze upon them. And with that gaze, they realized they had opened a door that could never be closed. Just as abruptly as the anomaly had reacted to the signal, it vanished. One moment, the control room was filled with the hum of monitors and the rapid pulse of data. Then, with a sudden flicker, the signal cut off. Silence. The room fell into an oppressive quiet. Evelyn sat frozen, her hands still hovering above the console. The anomaly had disappeared. No pulses, no gravitational anomalies, no heat signatures, nothing. "It's gone," Marcus whispered, his voice almost reverent as he stared at the now empty monitors. "Where did it go?" Frantic, the team scrambled to analyze the situation. Jacob furiously typed commands into the system, trying to retrieve any residual data, but there was nothing. No trace. No remnants of the anomalous signal they had so carefully tracked for days. The readings had flatlined entirely. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. How can it just vanish? It didn't drift away. It didn't move. It just stopped. But it wasn't just the absence of the anomaly that unsettled them. It was the feeling that lingered. The absence of the anomaly was not the end. It was a profound void, a kind of emptiness that felt wrong. It was as if the anomaly was still there, watching them from the depths of space, but no longer visible, no longer communicating. The team's collective gaze shifted nervously around the room, as if expecting the data to suddenly flicker back to life, or the anomaly to reappear out of nowhere. Despite all their efforts to trace its movements, there was no way to pinpoint where it had gone. It had disappeared without a trace, leaving only questions in its wake. The gravitational distortions, the odd heat signatures, and the strange pulses they had felt. Those were all gone, as if the anomaly had never been there at all. And yet, Evelyn couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. There was a presence, an awareness lingering in the back of her mind. The emptiness of space was suffocating, and she couldn't help but feel that whatever the anomaly was, it had not left entirely. It was still out there, watching, waiting. She couldn't help but feel that the disappearance was not an end, but a prelude to something far worse. Her gut told her that this was only the calm before the storm, a storm that was coming. But why had it left? And more importantly, why did it feel like it was still here? The days following the anomaly's disappearance were filled with tension and confusion. The team, once elated by the possibility of communication with an extraterrestrial intelligence, now found themselves in a state of limbo. The data they had gathered was invaluable but inconclusive. What had they been dealing with? Where had it gone? What was its purpose? Theories ran rampant within the facility. Some suggested the anomaly had left to return to its point of origin, a distant corner of the universe. Others speculated it had traveled through some form of interdimensional portal, perhaps even to a different reality. Could it be that the anomaly isn't bound by the same laws of space and time? Dr. Reeve asked one morning, his voice laced with awe. Maybe it's not from this dimension at all. Maybe it's using the fabric of space itself to move between realities. Others, including Director Stanton, took a more cautious approach. We need to consider the military implications, he said during a tense briefing. It could have been some form of advanced technology, something we don't yet understand. And if it's capable of appearing and disappearing like that, we need to prepare for the worst. This could be part of a larger strategy, one we don't even know how to recognize yet. Evelyn herself struggled with the questions that gnawed at her. What had the anomaly been? A living entity? A machine? Something other? The fact that it had communicated, albeit in its own cryptic way, suggested intelligence. But why had it left so suddenly? Did it achieve what it wanted? Or was it a warning? Had they provoked something they didn't understand? Her thoughts were interrupted when a senior military officer arrived at the facility, bringing an unwelcome sense of authority into the already strained atmosphere. From this moment on, all research and findings regarding the anomaly are classified, he declared, effectively placing a lockdown on the team's work. The once collaborative environment was now under the firm grip of military oversight. With this new oversight came a growing sense of unease. The team, once free to explore the mysteries of the anomaly, now found themselves under constant scrutiny. Their every move was being monitored, and the pressure to produce results was mounting. Some of the team, once eager to uncover the truth, began to question whether they would ever be allowed to know what the anomaly really was. The military's control was tight, and rumors began to spread outside the facility. Conspiracy theories, whispers of government cover-ups, and accusations of alien contact. For Evelyn, the hardest part was the weight of knowing something monumental had happened, and yet the answers were slipping through her fingers like sand. She had seen the anomaly. She had felt it. But now, with the world speculating and the military's growing influence, it felt like they had been denied the truth. The burden of knowledge was heavy, and Evelyn wondered if they would ever truly understand the entity that had crossed their path, or if they had been part of a much larger game. As the world outside began to speculate, Evelyn's mind raced with a terrifying thought. What if the anomaly had never truly left? What if it was watching them all along, biding its time, waiting for the right moment to return? It came without warning. One moment, Earth was peacefully orbiting the sun, and the next, the anomaly reappeared. But this time, It wasn't in the depths of space. It wasn't light years away. It was here. The first signs came as faint gravitational shifts, a subtle distortion in Earth's orbit that was immediately flagged by satellite systems. The team at the Juno Space Research Facility was thrust into chaos when new data began pouring in. The anomaly had returned, not in the farthest reaches of the cosmos, but in orbit around the moon, just beyond the surface. Impossible, Dr. Reeve muttered as he stared at the screen. The anomaly had appeared in the lunar orbit, silent and still, but its presence was undeniable. The very fabric of space seemed to tremble under its gaze. It was no longer a distant mystery. It was here, on their doorstep. Evelyn's heart raced as the weight of the situation sank in. The anomaly wasn't just somewhere in the universe anymore. It was circling the moon, observing Earth. It had come so much closer. The team worked furiously to track its movements, but the data remained sparse, mysterious. It seemed content to hover, just behind the moon's surface, out of sight, but ever present. The eerie quiet in the control room contrasted with the rising tension outside. The anomaly had returned, but its intentions were unclear. Its behavior was more deliberate now, its presence more unsettling. The team could feel its watchful gaze even though they couldn't see it directly. "What does it want?" Jacob asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question haunted everyone in the room. Was it observing, waiting, or was it planning something? As the days passed, the sense of dread grew. The anomaly's proximity was no accident. Its movements were too calculated, too focused on Earth. The closer it got to the moon's surface, the more its intentions seemed uncertain. The team was paralyzed, unable to act, unsure of how to respond to something that had so much power and was so far beyond their understanding. The presence of the anomaly was no longer just a mystery. It was a threat, one that loomed over them, watching in silence. And no one knew what would happen next. The days bled into one another. Exhaustion had settled into the team like a heavy fog, clouding their thoughts and weighing down their movements. Each member was deeply affected, yet no one dared speak of the growing unease that gnawed at them. The anomaly, ever present and silent, remained a constant fixture in their minds. They had spent months trying to decipher its signals, only to be met with more confusion and fear. Now, in orbit around the moon, it seemed to have shifted into a more watchful, passive state, its intentions as opaque as ever. Evelyn sat alone in the control room, staring at the screens. The anomaly's proximity to Earth felt like a shadow, hanging just beyond the edges of their understanding, something they couldn't escape even if they wanted to. The silence was unbearable, but it was the silence of something too vast to comprehend, too ancient and beyond their reach. It was as though they had stumbled upon a door that had been closed for millennia, and now they were left standing in front of it, unsure whether to knock, open it, or walk away. Her thoughts wandered back to the initial moment of discovery. How eager they had been, driven by humanity's endless curiosity. They had been prepared to find the answers, to push the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. But now, those same questions seemed to hang in the air, unanswered and infinitely more dangerous. What if this was never meant to be understood? What if they were never meant to find this entity at all? The realization crept in slowly, but with undeniable clarity. They weren't dealing with a discovery at all. They had been found. Humanity, in all its arrogance, had made contact with something far beyond them. The universe was vast, and they had never really understood their place in it. But this anomaly, was proof that the universe was also older and far more complex than they had ever dreamed. They weren't meant to have the answers, and perhaps they were never supposed to. The uncertainty of the situation felt suffocating. Was the anomaly waiting for something? A response? A reason? Or was it merely observing, silently judging humanity as it passed through the vast expanse of space? Evelyn's thoughts turned darker as the days wore on. There was a growing sense of impending confrontation, but it was not clear when or how it would arrive. The anomaly's behavior seemed passive, but Evelyn knew better than to assume it was harmless. No one knew when or if the confrontation would come. Perhaps it was a waiting game, one where they would have to prove themselves worthy, or risk facing the unknown consequences of their curiosity. The team had been plunged into a new reality, one where their understanding of the universe was shattered. They had glimpsed something that no one was prepared for. Evelyn's mind returned to the thing that haunted her most, the sense that they weren't alone. The anomaly had seen them, had reached out to them, and now it was watching. It had always been watching. As she gazed out at the stars, her final thought echoed in her mind, a chilling truth that she could never escape. The universe has always been a place of unanswerable questions, but some eyes, once turned toward you, never look away.